Today, we welcome Dr. Maria Camacho, a global expert on design thinking, someone known for inspiring and empowering teams to become more creative, empathic, and intentional in addressing challenges. Dr. Camacho is a PhD in design thinking and has worked for more than a decade with Stanford University's Design Innovation flagship programs and has more than 30 years of international experience in academia and industry. Her evidence-based approach is called Positive Mindsets by Design, and it draws from 70 years of design and psychological advancements to empower individuals and organizations to become truly creative, empathic, and future-oriented. That is truly transformational. Through her training, mentoring, and speaking, Dr. Camacho equips teams to confidently navigate uncertainty and make innovative choices. It has been my pleasure to have an in-depth conversation about her career, her choices, and the future of design thinking, one that is looking like it could really transform our world. Tune in. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Maria Camacho today to Transforming Worlds. Hello, Maria. How are you doing?
Hi, Carola. I'm doing really well.
That's amazing. I'm very happy to hear, and I'm excited to have you with us. So tell us about yourself and what is that which is transforming in your life and in your work these days?
So much. I think it's been a long journey of multiple transformations. The most recent one,
Mhm.
I've set up myself as an independent practice, as a speaker, corporate trainer, and coach on design thinking, independent. So that's the big transformation that I'm going through.
Mhm.
It's been a recent change, a recent thing that I've set up, but I am really, really excited about it, full of optimism and positivism about it.
Yeah. I mean, you already are, you've always been an independent thinker. So it looks like now you're actually spreading your wings and getting ready to take flight also as an independent professional. But I'm sure it's going to be fabulous and we're going to keep learning from you. Tell us about your background and your research.
Well, my background is I've always been in the world of design. Like design has always been my passion ever since I was thinking about what I should study. I had a cousin and some friends that were studying graphic design, industrial design, and I just loved it. I fell in love with creativity, creative work, and I didn't want to go any different way. So I ended up studying industrial design, and I think that defined quite a quite specific profile with regards to design.
Yeah.
Those of us who go through this kind of training, I think it's quite interesting with regards to what we see today, mostly applied to digital design,
Mhm.
because in design thinking, in design, industrial design, you are trained into ergonomics or human factors. So how do people interact with things and with the world? And we learn a lot about aesthetics as well, and how aesthetics can communicate things as well. So in industrial design, we get quite deep into these topics that I believe are very present today, even though they're not necessarily treated in such a deep and academic way as they used to be treated in industrial design. But
Mm.
that was my basis. And from there, I always have had wanted to study together with industrial design. I wanted to study business.
Mm.
That was not possible in my time to do a double degree. That was not possible. Nowadays, that's all possible, but it was not the time. So I left university and I discovered that in the UK, I was in Colombia at the time, my home country, and I discovered that in the UK, they were offering this Master of Design Leadership, and there was another one on design strategy and innovation, and another one on design management. And I thought, yeah, that's what I've got to do. And I ended up doing a Master of Arts in Design Leadership. And that also set my career in a very specific direction. And that was the time, it was the 90s, and it was a time when design management came to become a well-known field wherein organizations were embedding design in a centralized way if they were doing it very well. And it was called design management. And then I went back to Colombia and I kept working on that field. I ended up involved in academia and I set up a couple of undergraduate design programs in two different universities. One, industrial design, in a university that was very focused on business education. So the design program, we set it up to be quite focused or based on business education as well. So it was a very sort of revolutionary for its moment. This university had been set up by big industry owners. So that was the sort of characteristic of the university. And then the other one I set up was visual communication design at a Jesuit university, Javeriana University. And that was after doing a whole study about what kind of design was needed in the region. At that time, I was living in Cali, one of the major cities in Colombia, but not the capital. Although I come from the capital. And that program was it's had its story of its own. I see what the graduates are doing nowadays. That was ages ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a fantastic thing to do. And then while I was doing all of that, and I also had a consultancy of my own for 8 years at the same time, and the stars aligned, and I ended up working with a partnership with Stanford University, with the mechanical engineering faculty, the design group.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this program, international global program of education, in which they wanted to bring students and professors from universities from different countries in the world to work together on industry design innovation projects. And they were sponsored projects. And so I ended up having the opportunity to start with Stanford with 2 projects, and then we ended up with that they got for us. So one of them was with Kodak. I think it was the last year that Kodak was something.
Yes.
And the other one was with Autodesk, I remember.
Ah.
And then from then on, we had to find projects of our own in Colombia as well, so that we could make an exchange. And I set myself up to that, and I ended up collaborating 7 years with Stanford, bringing projects from industries from Colombia to pay the fees, which were, for a Colombian organization, they were super high fees.
Yes.
To pay these collaborations, and that got me into what we know today as design thinking. The D School was being set up, the famous D School, where design thinking has been, in a way, promoted around the world, was evolving and being set up. Like I saw the D School in 3 different places until it finally got its final building.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw 2 prototypes of the D School before its
That
final.
must have been fascinating. I mean, fascinating. I mean, I only know the story from hearsay for sure, but the questions that David Kelly and the wonderful Bill Mogridge must have had from idea when moving into the school and trying to say we have to do this to help change the world. It really feels like they were very driven from the heart. So it must have been fabulous and messy, for sure.
Very messy and very fabulous and very much from the heart, as you say. I had the opportunity to meet David Kelly. The first time I saw him around, I was like, oh, I gotta meet this guy. And I just went to him and said hello and blah, blah. And we clicked and we became friends. And then because I was going every year I would see him all the time. He was more and more spending time at Stanford rather than at IDEO at the time.
Yeah.
And it was the time that he got his cancer. And so he told me all about it. And so it was like very personal. So all these things happened with the relationship with Stanford. And then we were educating, let's say, giving the opportunity of having Stanford-led education to a few amount of very good students, Colombian students,
Yeah.
that most of them were from middle to low socioeconomic extract. So they were having the opportunity of their lives without paying anything themselves. And that was fantastic. And then the opportunity to come and do a PhD in Australia with a good scholarship came about. And my husband and I set sail, and we came over to Melbourne, Australia, without having ever put a foot here before.
Wow.
And we were going to stay 3 years, and it's been 11 years. So I did my PhD, and I had been here for a little while when I ended up getting the opportunity to work full-time as an academic at the university I was studying at. That was Swinburne University of Technology. And I also was able to bring the collaboration with Stanford with me. And we even brought a project from a Colombian industry to work together with Stanford and with the Swinburne University so that we could, I spent half the academic year of that project in Colombia and the other half here. We didn't want to annoy the industry or anyone. So we did it like a 3-way collaboration, which was quite odd. But it was great. And then I kept working with the Stanford collaboration from Swinburne University for 3 more years here. And then I moved into working on setting up another undergraduate course. It's something I like to do, apparently. And
you do it well. You do it very well.
Yeah, I love it. I love setting up new things. And this was a Bachelor of Innovation and Design, and I was also working quite a lot in setting up the Master of Design Strategy and Innovation that was new at the time. And yeah, so that was up until 2021.
Yeah.
And then I left academia, quite a jump, and I decided to go into industry, which was a great thing to do because, when we, or I don't know if you hear this, but when you live in the academic world, you hear everyone outside saying like, "Oh, those academics, they don't know anything about the real world. The real world is one thing, and the academic world is another one, right?" And as an academic, you're always saying like, "No, we do know, of course, because we have, the ultimate knowledge."
Yeah.
But I have to say that I worked for 3 years with Frog, which is a consultancy that was bought by Capgemini, a large consultant with French origins. And that was an eye-opener for me. That was a big eye-opener as to what was really happening, specifically with digital design.
And how would you qualify that? It's pretty fascinating because I'm listening to your story and there are these things going through my head. First of all, your reference to industry, which I understand from an academic perspective, as in the real world, as you call it, but we are in the post-industrial time. So industry, which industry? Like I thought that kind of stopped mattering, and we've moved into a realm in which it's much more, digital and service oriented, particularly because if you just look at it from economic value creation or value destruction, some say, but still in terms of the volume that brings, it's less industrial and much more ethereal from an industrial design perspective. Let me put it that way. So then you go into Frog and you're in the real world, and so how does that feel? Because it must have felt a lot less tangible, perhaps, than you would have expected. or
Yes,
perhaps even more
it was a big
experimental.
jump. Yes, very. It was a big jump for me because coming from an industrial design background,
Hmm.
um, well, to start with, I had been educated into the design of physical objects.
Yeah.
Um, then I went into communication design, and that's the design of visual
Hmm.
products.
Yes.
And yes, digital products came about, but it's suddenly this thing that everything has become digital. And we saw it coming when we were at Stanford, because I was working with the mechanical engineering faculty. They wanted projects to be very tangible oriented, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But there came a point in which the professors couldn't stop the students from ending up, because the projects we were working with were very open. The briefs were very, very open, and they were solution agnostic. So we encouraged them to not think about what kind of solution they were going to get from the start. It could be a
Yes.
digital product, it could be a physical product, it could be a service, it could be anything. It could be an education program, it could be a law, it could be a policy, who knows? So we really encouraged that, and then it just started to happen naturally as the world evolved, that all projects started to become quite digital oriented
Yeah.
at Stanford. But
Hmm.
then from that point until the point that I went to Frog, that had shifted even more. Um, and even Frog, that started being pretty much an industrial design company, the industrial design part of it had become quite smallish.
Yeah.
Um, so and it was thinking, okay, it's a new world, because the way that digital products are being designed, there are new approaches. It's completely cross-functional. You are working with multidisciplinary teams because you have to.
Yes.
And even though we were talking about working in multidisciplinary teams for ages with Stanford, that was sort of a creation of ours. This was like it's
Hmm.
gotta be that way. Yeah.
How does that
And
feel? Because it sounds like how you are telling us about it, as if it is also something that is imposed on people. You
you mean the
must
digital design?
no, the collaboration. So,
Right.
working with others who are different from you and who are bringing a different perspective, which seen in a negative way might mean they're delaying your project. They're asking you to consider your own ideas. And that must be very disturbing of the process itself. But at the same time, it is, as we know from the work of the Stanford D School, it is the key to open our minds to new solutions, right? Otherwise, like you're not doing things in a unique way on purpose. You are doing things in a unique way because that's what you learned. So having others challenge you on that is actually what's going to create room for the new. But in real life, that's hard. So,
Yes, and it was a very hard thing to do in an academic environment, for example,
hmm.
to to teach. And I was very adamant to get students to work in teams,
Yes.
which in an academic environment, like some work and some don't, and then some of them just want a low grade and pass, and some others want to have like the best grade ever.
Mm.
Um, so I ended up even ideating, creating a new system to evaluate students that were working in groups, so
Oh, that's
that
fascinating.
I studied some work that had been done previously by other people, and tested a method that they had come up with, and I ended up adapting it to my situation, and
Mm.
I tested it like for 3 years, and I modifying it a little bit each time. I didn't get to write a paper about it. I should have.
Yeah,
Um,
you should. You should.
but it ended up working, because I would rather get myself through the trouble of doing all that to grade those students that
Yeah.
were working in teams, um, rather than getting them to work on their own when that's not how it's going to happen out there in the world.
No, it's not. Yeah.
And I think I had been sort of trained into the working in teams through with the Stanford work throughout 10 years. We were not only working in teams, we were working in remote teams and multicultural teams. A very crazy thing, a multidisciplinary team. So it was very crazy, and we were relying a lot on a lot of research from Stanford about how to create good teams, and a lot of it was how do you create the teams according to the cognitive patterns or the personality of each of the students, so that you can have certain specific elements in each team that you know that are going to help the team to succeed. So I got used to all that. So when I got to Frog, that bit was not necessarily a surprise for me, but I could see that for people, it's still something very, very hard to do.
It starts in kindergarten. I mean,
well, yeah.
we all know that, right? So it starts
Exactly.
early on, but I think it's, this podcast is called Transforming Worlds because we speak to pioneers like you who are helping transform things, and eventually those things are going to transform the world for all of us. And it's asking these questions, right? So what is it going to take for us to appreciate the talent in one another, appreciate the differences so that actually that can rub us and mold us and make us better people, kinder people, more open people, and eventually lead to much better solutions. But it takes a special kind of view of life, if you were, right? It's almost, it starts at the philosophical level, and then we need to put into practice, because otherwise it's just like we're back in the Stone Age, and as they say, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, right? So we'd still be throwing rocks at one another instead of realizing that we're at a time in which we need to evolve beyond competition and to find new forms of collaboration, but we're still at the very early days of that. And that brings me to your main topic of research on design thinking and the different forms of design thinking, because I think that's for me it's been wonderful to read about how there are many approaches to that. Having done a lot of design thinking work in large organizations, it became something that people were uncomfortable with increasingly in my career as I started going into leadership positions. And people said, what does Carola do other than work with Post-its? And these kinds of mean comments, which we've all heard. I mean, that's not unique to me. Yes. And it's, making these thinking processes explicit and shared was what really drew me into that, and saying, we keep having meetings and talking at one another, but never actually bringing it to a level of traction where we actually start doing things as a concerted effort. And it seems to me that your main topic of research is about this. What is design thinking? And you got into a rabbit hole, Maria. What is design thinking, and what are the modes in which this operates, and how might we learn from that? So tell us a bit about that.
Yes, it's a wide topic, as my supervisors warned.
I'm sure.
All the time. But I really wanted to research the whole thing. And one of the things that was, let's not say bothering, but what other word can I use? That I felt curious about, let's say. Was if different people in different contexts are practicing design thinking and they're learning it in different ways, when they have to come together to work with design thinking, they're not communicating. And I started to see how I had come with it was obviously, and I am obviously absolutely influenced by the Stanford approach to design thinking. And even there are two branches of design thinking at Stanford, because one is the D school and the other one is the academic based engineering one. And I was more on that second one. And And I could see that there were so many differences, and I was like, this is not right, because it's meant to work for multidisciplinary teams. Um, and that had happened because of a really good thing, and it's that design thinking started to be adopted by non-designers in very different contexts, which is great, and that's something that I talk about a lot, and that it's one of my missions to bring design thinking to non-design contexts. And design started to become an incredible tool for public service design,
Mm-hmm.
for social innovation, for business model design, things, all of these different things, and the intangible that start to become more and more embedded into creating the intangible things, which was a complete challenge for designers. And I keep thinking that even designers don't necessarily know well or enough about design thinking, even though they carry a lot of their mindsets. But the design thinking that we are talking about nowadays, which is, I call it in my thesis, the contemporary design thinking, the one that emerged from the start of this century,
Yeah.
applied to innovation, applied to all these different fields, to non-design fields, it's been enriched by other disciplines, and so it needs to come back again, enriched to the designers who are studying the craft programs of design, so that everyone can communicate.
I love
Um,
this. I mean, I'm just like listening to every word in deep fascination because I've been in many contexts which, funnily enough, we call them non-design, but of course we look at things from a design lens, and design is everywhere. Like, what is non-design? I mean, everything is design. Um, But indeed, where design practices and design craftsmanship are not established as modes of working and modes of doing, and then you go into these places and you have to explain it. And for years, I was looking for a definition. And the definition I use the most belongs to the late Herbert Simon of the Carnegie Mellon School of Design, who
yeah.
said that to design is to devise courses of actions in order to change existing conditions into preferred ones, and which I always paraphrase by saying, even more simply, to design is to transform existing conditions into preferred ones. And this means acknowledging the existing condition and having that communication you're talking about, which we as designers are not as good at because we're doers. So we immediately want to jump into the solution instead of having real discussions about what's going on and how we might address that, how we might go about that, how we might interpret that. Are we seeing the same things? Are we feeling the same things? All of these treasures that really the Stanford D School has brought to the world as new languages for us to be able to collaborate in the realm of design. And then, of course, there is the craftsmanship, which is the part of this quote by Herbert Simon, for which Herbert Simon got into deep trouble, because when he said that back in the day, people said, but if that is true, then everyone is a designer. And he said, yes. And we have to be able to rise above that and realize that if we live in a designed world, which we do, if we need to redesign this world, which we do, then we're going to need more of this and not less of it. And being restrictive and being competitive and being elitist about our skills as designers is actually inconducive to the creation of solutions. So we as designers need to get over ourselves and understand that this needs to happen. But that's why your work is so valuable, because we start having this mirror reflected back at us, which you just called enriching, right? So it is allowing us to make a new iteration about our practices, our ways of working, our ways of being in the world, which is fabulous. And you look at three different ways of approaching design thinking, right?
I not necessarily three different ways of approaching it, but I extracted three foundational principles of
Yes.
design thinking. And perhaps to explain them, I'll first go into a little explanation of design craft versus contemporary design thinking.
Yes.
And so we have to understand that there's a bit of a defining line. So one thing is the design as a craft, when you have to create something that is going to have an aesthetic quality and that it's going to have an interaction, a tangible interaction with a person or a group of people.
Yeah.
When you create these kinds of things, you go through a creative process. You empathize with users because you're creating these physical things that need to be manipulated, etc., or that need to communicate something and need to be understandable. However, those wonderful ways of thinking of design, what's come to fruition nowadays is that they can be applied to creating none of those aesthetic, physical things that we manipulate, but quite abstract things or just non-tangible, like a policy or a law or a strategy. So those products of design don't need the design craft skills, but they do need the design ways of thinking and working. And that those are the ones that have been extracted from the design professions, which have evolved. All that knowledge has evolved since the 1940s, at least. There's the design theory has had an incredible evolution to get us to the design thinking that we have today, so that we can take these concepts and apply them to this different way of producing, of creating, or these different outputs that we're creating. But we're still talking about creating. So the first principle of design thinking that I extracted is that design thinking is about creation. And if we talk about design thinking as a problem-solving approach, it's different to other ones that were there before, because the other ones were not talking about creating a new thing. They were just thinking about, let's solve a problem in A, B, or C way, but not with a creative way of thinking, rather focusing on analytic thinking, on past data, and not looking at future potential, future data, or producing new data by testing things and producing new data about what could be. So that is a totally different way of solving problems that design is bringing to the world with design thinking. So that's the first foundational principle. The other one is that design thinking is human-centered, a very popular term. And that's where I say the difference with design thinking and human-centeredness is that design thinking is more than being human-centered, because it's creation-based, and the third one that I'm going to talk about later. So the human-centeredness is about that concept of, okay, businesses, governments, etc., have thought about their problems from their point of view, because it's their problem that they don't have money or they can't, whatever it is, the way the problems are coming to them, how they feel it. But now it's, let's go and stand where the people that are affected by the real problem are, and let's go and find out exactly what's happening to them. And that's a totally revolutionary concept for businesses and governments, etc. Even though we think, okay, but it's citizens, like, haven't governments always designed for the citizens?
Well,
yeah, but
that is a complicated question.
yes. And when you put together this human-centeredness with the creation, boom, it's like, okay, we're putting two very strong concepts together to work together. And then the third one, which is the design thinking foundational principle that is least talked about. And there's quite a few groups that talk about design thinking and systems thinking and how they come together. But what I extracted was that this systems thinking is pretty much like a third leg of design thinking. And it's there and it has to be there, because when we're solving problems, we're not just looking at them with blinkers. We're we're looking at the problems embedded in a context, how all the different variables affect them. We're trying to reframe problems. That goes hand in hand with, well, we're looking at the problem at different levels. And that's where we eventually have gotten into working towards problems that Richard Buchanan has called the third and fourth order design, problems to create or define or work to solve problems at a system level or at a service level, which are the intangible ones. And Richard Buchanan was ahead of his time in the 90s. Nobody understood him.
I love
That
his work. I love, and to your point previously, Dick Buchanan actually has now moved to the Weatherhead School of Management. So he's actually moved into the realm of business because
yes,
perhaps because he didn't feel fully heard in the world of
exactly.
design. With his indeed with his four levels of design, which is some call it simplistic, but I think it's a wonderful framework to understand how far we can go with these
Profound.
skills and these qualities and these ways of doing and being in the world. So
Yes,
it's interesting. It's similar to your journey.
he was one of my interviewees for the
Mm,
thesis.
mm.
Yes, I had that pleasure of interviewing him and then having many other conversations with him, which was really interesting. And he had a very big impact on my work.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that his brilliance was in is it is indeed in inquiry and being able to ask questions with this thing that you reframed so beautifully just a while ago when you said it was bothering me. No, wait, what do I want to say? It was making me curious. I think that that's a way of looking at the world that is very
Yeah,
needed. If we're going to look at the creation elements, the human-centeredness, and the systemic elements of design, then we have to go at it with curiosity and open-mindedness for sure.
totally. And that was another great finding of unexpected finding. And it's the amount of the amount of foundation that design has, especially the design thinking from Stanford,
Hmm.
has an incredible story of having been influenced a lot by psychology and specifically humanist psychology, which was the one that Abraham Maslow promoted. And then that has become what nowadays is positive psychology. And even David Kelly talks about how positive psychology has influenced their approach to design thinking. And I've become quite obsessed with this topic. And I think there's a big key there to train people to be able to practice design thinking, the creative, the human-centered and systemic approach all at once.
Hmm.
Um, with from a departing from a positive psychology point of view, and it's all about being positive. I mean, and if you think about design thinking, it's all about being positive. Actually, it's about having fun. It's about, because if you're not having that kind of attitude, you cannot be creative. Like all of these things that we practice in design thinking have their own why, which
Hmm.
some people think, oh, those post-it notes or those people there having some fun, they're not real
Oh
engineers or they're
man.
not real.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is the main source of critique, right? So if anything, I think most of these practices are critiqued by because of the fact that we're not doom thinkers and we're not looking at the deep problems. So sometimes, unfortunately, it is seen as something very superficial. How
Very
can we
much.
reframe that? Because we're not doing a good job as designers in communicating what design can do. So
Yeah,
how might we reframe the fact that people think that it's superficial and it's because of its playfulness, it's considered perhaps childish as opposed to the seriousness of business? How can we reframe that?
that was the mission of my research. I wanted to go and dig and find whether, are we talking about design thinking being a superficial thing? And let's see, am I going to find that it's really a superficial thing, or am I going to find its depth? And what I knew I was going to discover, and I discovered it, was that it does have such depth that
Yes.
it's incredible. And what I find is that people are never taught, not even at the D school, people are never taught about why you do things the way you do them in design thinking. And I think that is very important for practitioners of design thinking to value it and to be able to practice it in a flexible way, because one thing that's happened, an unfortunate thing, is that the explosion of workshops of design thinking all over the world, delivered by people that had taken another one-day workshop of design thinking and had a certificate that said, I am a certified design thinker. So then they would go and deliver workshops for businesses, etc. And of course, things would fail. And then the outcome would be clients and companies, etc., saying, oh, that design thinking thing doesn't work. And of course, how could it work if you look at it and it's all childish and fun, and they go around playing with a ball in the studio, and who knows, yeah. But the thing is, all of this has such in-depth foundations, and for me, a great evidence of its in-depth value was teaching all those engineering students on design thinking. We had the university, the engineering, we were fortunate to have the dean and the directors and the president of the university on our side and believing in it very much. But then the rest of the engineering faculty at the university I was working with, they were like looking at us like, that's not valid what they're doing. And because we ended up replacing students from all the different engineering disciplines, so electrical engineering, computer science, civil engineering, they were doing, instead of doing a graduation project and their internship, they were doing the Stanford thing, which was 9 months, quite in-depth work, intense. And for them, having been trained in engineering, they really got to understand the value of it by living it and realizing the results. Most of them have gone into the world to become leaders of innovation in different organizations. And many of them are not even practicing their own engineering field, but innovation, and have good positions and are influencing the world out there. And so all of those that were looking at us through the window didn't understand, and they didn't want to understand. And of course, when you haven't gone through it, it's quite hard to understand.
For sure.
So I think there's more we can do with disseminating why design thinking works, why it's valuable and valid, and explaining that to the world.
And so when we do, let's just imagine that we can fast forward 5, 10, maybe 20, 50 years into the future. When we do, and when people go through it viscerally and experientially, which is what you've just said, it's not, oh, we told you a trick, we gave you a method book, we did a demo in a one-day workshop, but it's really, you've gone through it, you have the lived experience, it has transformed you, it has changed you, it has changed the way you practice your own original profession or craft. It has changed the spaces in which you now go and do your work. Once we achieve that in the future, what does the world look like? What does society look like for you if we would, bring this to everyone?
Well, it's hard to know. I am, because I am a positivist and optimist by nature as well. So I'm hoping that it's all going to look wonderful and that design, creativity, human-centeredness. It for me, and I'm also a humanist, and it's always been about evolving, making good for people, evolving the world from the way we found it so that it's better when we leave. And in the end, one thing that I found in my studies was that those who are still alive and in their 80s and are very much some of the creators of these approaches, something that they don't say in their books and in their material is how profound for them is caring for the world. And that was a discovery. And if you see now, for example, Don Norman, who has been the guy that's promoted user experience and human-computer interaction, I interviewed him for my thesis as well. And he told me about these things. And after that, now he's written his last book, which is Design for Humanity, or Humanity Design, something like that is the title. So he's finally gone into, and he was talking to me about how he got influenced by a very early author of design called Victor Papanek, which used to talk about design for the real world, which was all about, we have such a responsibility as designers in the world because we are creating the things that are going to impact our future and the future of our planet, which in the industrial era, we were not aware of all the bad that we were not as aware as we are now. So it all comes together. This humanism goes hand in hand with design thinking, in my view. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I see a world in the future where, yes, design thinking in its profound way has been adopted by professionals and by every different kind of profession, by governments, and it's helping us to be better at creating that artificial world that Herbert Simon talked about, and creating a world that is more humanist, responsible towards human and other life in the planet, because that's how we are in the planet, because the planet exists. So being humanistic nowadays is not just about taking care of the human, but everything that makes us live and thrive. So that's how I see, hopefully, the future being. So people having adopted in a serious way these ways of thinking together with the humanistic view. I think the Don Norman's book's going to do a terrific job there. Yeah. Hopefully it gets read by many people.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is this aspect also. You mentioned David Kelly going through his illness, and the book he wrote with his brother on creative confidence is also in many ways bringing us this hope as well, showing us that it's really up to us, and that there's nothing to fear. And that's so important, right? Embracing that from that humanistic point of view, realizing that we have to go beyond fear and go into the unknown with these skills and with these questions, knowing that the next question is going to arise immediately, because it's not like in the industrial era, it's not the designers were wrong or that they were doing things on purpose. It's just that entropy is part of design. It will always have unintended consequences because we are not all knowing. And exactly. In our ambition to create, to build a better world, a kinder world, we may be overlooking the impacts of our actions because it's gotten so complex that it's going to impact in places that we simply, even working in diverse teams, even taking into consideration systemic complexity, we won't be able to know everything from the get-go. So these questions will keep arising. in your PhD, I'm sure they asked you, what is your next question for science? And in this podcast, I'm asking you, what's your next question for the world? Once design thinking becomes more of an established practice, what will we be asking ourselves then?
Well, I'm not entirely sure because it's like we go through eras, and it's quite coincidental that the change of century has been quite a strong cut between a before and after in many aspects, and certainly with design it has, and I think it was a fortunate come together of situations that were happening each one on their own, and the time came when it was right for them to come together. It was right for design in its level of maturity to come into business when businesses suddenly find themselves facing so much complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity, etc. With the kind of way the world has evolved and is evolving in front of our eyes. So that was like a fortunate encounter of things in the right moment, which is what made design thinking become adopted by different kinds of entities. And I'm not sure what other aligning of the stars is going to happen in the future, and something might come from the evolution of everything that we're thinking. Whatever it is, I just hope that the evolution tends towards pursuing good and the maintenance of humanity, and yes, doing good. I don't know exactly what is our whole mission in the world, but whatever that is, for it to be to the good for the world. And one last thing about it, one thing that I tried to argue in my thesis was that design thinking should be a liberal arts knowledge. Just like we
Wow.
learn maths or we learn language, or my supervisors dissuaded me. They thought that that was too complicated to argue, but actually, Richard Buchanan sort of gives a pointer towards that in some of his papers, and I'm pretty sure that that's how it should be. It should just be part of every curriculum of every kid, and just like Stanford is doing. It's not mandatory for Stanford students, but any Stanford student can go and take one of those electives in the D school, and a lot of them do because it's so much fun. And what they don't even know is that they end up acquiring these wonderful mindsets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My guess is that your next question is a how might we question. And you've just framed it beautifully. How might we be of service to life and to the world? And if all of us align around that, it's going to be a much better place for sure.
Yeah.
So tell us, where can people find you and find your work?
On LinkedIn.
On
I think
LinkedIn.
that's the main place where you can find me and perhaps be redirected to my publications and other work. Yes, and that's where I'm posting and commenting and presenting my knowledge nowadays. So anyone can look for Dr. Maria Camacho on LinkedIn, and I'd be more than happy to also be connected with anyone that's interested in continuing this kind of discussion and learning more. I'm also a mentor on something called adplist.org. This is a wonderful initiative of it's a startup from a guy in Singapore, which doesn't aim to produce any money, but it's about getting people like myself to be able to mentor younger designers on any topic that they want to discuss, and free of charge for them, and we can just give our time. So I volunteer there. And anyone that wants to have a one-on-one mentorship with me can find me in ADP list and just book me.
That's excellent. We're going to add both of those links to the show notes. And I really want to thank you for this amazing conversation, which took us to many beautiful and unexpected places of exploring our design profession and what it can do for the world. I think that the career you've just shown us you've had and the way you've gone about it is an inspiration for many. So thank you very much for being with us today, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, Carola. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and what an opportunity to be able to voice all the things that I think about design thinking, which I'm certainly hoping that they go for, end up doing good for the world.
They will transform the world. That thing is a certainty. Thank you so much, Maria. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Carola. Bye.